Rosemary and David Rock Evans. Gardening. First steps. David and Rosemary moved into their house on December 6, 1976, 1 year after they were married, and lived there still. The bank in front of the house was infested with rose, bay willow, herb and brambles, and out of control. So they built a shelter for some piglets, whose job it was to clear the bank of all the weeds. Ably assisted by some chickens, although we found that unless the chickens were very well fenced in, the pigs would steal the eggs from the chickens, in preference to weeds. Pigs do not foul their own living quarters, and thus they pooed near the chicken run, the opposite side of the garden. So whilst work started mending the barn roof, and after the pigs had done their work clearing the bank and were long gone, we planted a beech hedge and some shelter belt trees to protect the vegetables from the wind, as we placed the vegetable garden where the chickens and pigs had been so that the ground was well fertilized. Terracing the new vegetable garden. Not long after we had moved the vegetables from the top garden to the new bottom garden. David was mocked by an Indonesian on holiday. You cannot be a real farmer if you are on a slope and don't have terraces. And David decided the Indonesian was right, so on his return from holiday, David set about terracing the vegetable garden. 3 major terraces created using railway sleepers, surrounded by the beech hedges to act as a windbreak. Whereupon David decided to invest in a polytunnel. As at 800 foot up in the Pennines, crops such as French green beans, tomatoes, courgettes and squashes, even many outdoor plants were better started as seedlings in the polytunnel. Though hardy staple crops like runner beans needed no nurturing. But if we were to use organic gardening, then we would need, for example, fleece to protect the carrots from carrot root fly. And all brassicas needed protecting against caterpillars and butterfly. Here are David and Lawrence with muffin by the fleece protection. And the seedlings needed protection from frosts. We built fruit cages to protect the gooseberries, black currants, raspberries, and loganberries from the squirrels. And a rabbit fence outside the hedge, once the hedge was big enough to stop the bunnies leaping over it. We built numerous compost heaps near the polytunnel that could be used as fertilizer. And all kitchen waste went on the compost heaps as well as all the weeds. As did the manure from neighbors' horses or the manure from this indoor cattle which our neighbor tipped over the wall to let us decide what to do with it. The polytunnel doors could be opened at both ends to get fresh air through it, and David fitted a sprinkler system so that he could water the crops inside. We also grew early crops, spring cabbage, summer salad, broad beans, peas, rocket, which takes a long time outdoors, to give us a continual supply of fresh vegetables. And it became possible to do successional sowing, as the spring cabbages ended, and as long as we replenished the soil with well-rotted compost. We could plant the tomatoes, already well established, to replace the crops we had eaten. Even hardy outdoor crops often did better for having been started in the polytunnel. cabbage root fly can be prevented by sowing the plant with a circular disc that prevents the eggs from hatching and boring down into the root. Growing fruit. Rhubarb grew extremely well in the garden, bolstered by well-rotting manure and compost. But we were too high to grow fruit trees like pears unless we grew them, espalier fashion, against a south-facing stone wall. The warmth of the wall then protected the tender blossom. And we had two types of pear for cross-pollination, one of which was commise, but both of which did really well. Flowering trees. But although our main aim was to be virtually self-sufficient in vegetables, we surrounded ourselves with flowering trees, flowering bushes, and flowers, beauty to feed the soul. We planted flowering cherry, flowering almond, and a magnificent magnolia that the garden center owner said would simply never survive at our height, but it did. We planted it on a south-facing slope, sheltered from the northerly winds by both trees and a wall. And every year huge pink blossoms greet us in the spring. Cornus Cusa fills the library window with its flowers, along with a massive rambling rose. Peony bowl of beauty fills the flower beds. And daffodils and miniature narcissus surround the pond. And we have been able to grow roses by placing them in well-sheltered positions. Both tea roses and scrambling and rambling roses. A fuchsia hedge protects us from the fearsome east winds. Both white and purple, scented, wisteria climbs over the pergola and the house. Hanging baskets hang from the pergola. And we have rhododendrons to provide a splash of color in spring. Rhododendrons, because they too prove to be hardy from the biting east winds that hit us from Lincolnshire. Wood for the log burner. All the shelter belt trees that we planted around the 1980s have all matured and been thinned to make sure they grow into sturdy mature trees. And the dried logs that resulted from managing the wood are used on the inset wood burner in our living room. Bees. David's father gave us 2 hives of bees that helped to fertilize the crops. When it was time to harvest the honey, we took the frames out of the hive. The bees cap the frames with wax. In order to extract the honey, the wax seal is carved off using a hot knife. The wax and bits of honey fall into a metal tray heated by hot water and warm the knife used to remove the wax capping. Once the wax cap has been removed, the frames are loaded into an extractor. The handle of the extractor is turned in order to spin the honey out by centrifugal force into the extractor drum. When the extractor is full, the honey is run off through a filter into the ripener for the wax to float to the top, leaving pure clear honey below. This honey is then run off into the honey jars. The final runoff from the ripener, which includes some wax, pollen and other byproducts from the bees, is mixed with herbs and warm water and decanted into a demijohn with an air trap stopper. It is then left to ferment and form mead. After fermentation has completely ceased, the mead is carefully decanted into bottles to mature into a fine wine over many months and years. The back lawn, barbecue and patio. The back lawn was made into a croquet pitch with its own terrace, stone-built barbecue and massive stone table, along with a water feature made from a barrel cut in half. The pond. The pond was made from the arches of 2 industrial buildings that were demolished in Stocksbridge. The 2 arches were laid on their side, stuck together and placed on a sealed base. It is now full of water lilies, purple and yellow flag iris and salamanders, and teems with life. Aerial view, 2000. And this is the aerial view of the garden around 2000, missing the polytunnel, but terraced, showing the pond and terraced wall at the front of the garden and the croquet lawn. Photos by David Rock Evans. Idea by Rosemary Rock Evans. Video montage by Serge Patlavsky.